Welcome to Silicon Valley Successes. On today's show, we have Carrick Colton. He is the inventor of the next generation mouse, RBT, which stands for Right Above Touch. Loved by designers, coders, and gaming enthusiasts, and endorsed by Blender. Mark Bullock, a designer, consultant, and educator, with clients including Amazon, Pottery Barn, Crate & Barrel, Anthropology, and many more. On today's show, we're going to talk about the importance of design and the life of a startup. In a moment. Mark, Carrick, welcome to Silicon Valley Successes. So, Mark, what is a good design? What are the components of a good design?
Well, I think in order to really understand good design, you kind of have to understand bad design.
Well, what is bad design then?
Well, bad design is much easier to see, right? Because if something is designed well, you're probably not going to notice. Your experience with that product, with that device, with that website will be seamless, might even be enjoyable. But if you have that product and maybe it gives you, over a period of time, ergonomic problems in your wrist or your fingers, that's bad design. If it's that drill that keeps falling over in the workspace, that's bad design. And so really good design is kind of seamless. It's what we say 99% invisible.
That's interesting. So when you're looking at a product right now, right off the bat, can you determine or know if it's good design or bad design?
Well, I think when we look at product, our kind of emotional reactions to it, or our kind of gut instinct when we look at it is probably more aesthetic. When we use that product and we interface with that product is when we really kind of determine whether or not this is a successful design or not.
And Carrick, you're a startup founder and multiple startups you've founded. Can you talk about a little bit of your journey from when you started to right now with the RBT?
Sure. So my first official startup was qualitytextbook.com. It was the first digitalized textbooks for all the UC systems back in 2009 and 10. And I carried on with that startup and basically grind it down to the floor.
When you say grind it down to the floor,
right,
what do you mean exactly by that?
Well, the startup went on for about 3 years of time, and I wasn't able to bring it to profitability within the lifetime of the startup, and it closed.
So that journey, though, you must have learned quite a bit that kind of prepared you for what you're doing now.
I didn't think it did, but looking back now, it sure has taught me a lot of valuable lessons. Probably the most important lesson is who to work with, as well as controlling costs and time frame.
Interesting. And Mark, tell me about your journey into being a designer, and spare no details.
Well, actually started here in California, and while I was studying, got a job with a consultancy that focused on engineering, and this was a long time ago, what we know as 3D printing. And so that introduced me to a lot of wonderful companies, and we did some pretty pioneering stuff for that space, and certainly that time. And then I actually started working here in Silicon Valley with the Paul Allen Group, right over on Page Mill.
Paul Allen, that name sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Who is he?
Well, for one, he's the owner of the Seahawks, or used to be the owner of the Seahawks. But he invested tons of money in a kind of research incubator, really just kind of funding it for kind of pure research and design. And I was lucky enough outside of school to get in there and work with some of the brighter minds in the Valley. And after that was done, I reinvented myself for a third time and realized that a lot of my time on the weekends and during holidays was spent designing furniture. And so I kind of quit the job and with very few responsibilities, and it was pretty easy. Just kind of started my own business, consulting. And then I was picked up by a really big company in San Francisco called Williams-Sonoma and helped grow one of their divisions really from maybe a $60,000 business to maybe $500 million, primarily with design. But what was interesting about that is when this kind of global economy started blossom for designers, and so where a lot of the work that I was doing in the Valley and in the East Bay was very kind of local. All of a sudden, my studio, my sandbox became the entire world because we were manufacturing and developing products all over the world. So it was a fantastic education. And then I went on to another corporation and had the fortunate experience to launch a brand through design as well. And that was a really, really successful launch with a company in Corte Madera. And, that was the first half of my career as kind of an employee. The second half of my career has been doing a lot of that, plus continued growth as an independent consultant, really trying to work in as many different industries as I can. We launched our own brand at one point, and that's kind of where I got into education as well. But I think I consider myself kind of a vertical designer where for our clients, we want to be able to take that cocktail napkin sketch and not only take it into production, but really kind of see it through sales and distribution. And so that's been my connections to the few startups that I've worked with most recently.
So another question, Mark. Designing for a global customer, that's got to be completely different than that localized one. What thoughts are going in your mind? What extra research do you have to do for that broader market?
Right. Well, that's kind of interesting because some of my bigger failures were actually trying to reach audiences outside of the U.S. Biggest failures and best learning experiences. But really the value that I added to a lot of these manufacturers and vendors all over the world was the opposite. And so they worked with me, they worked with us to really try to penetrate the American market. And so, we kind of intuitively knew, and I intuitively knew how product sells well in the United States. And so companies and manufacturers and vendors would approach me to design products that would sell here in the States.
And Carrick, you have a product now that is selling worldwide. In fact, let me show
just
the
for countries,
camera.
actually. Officially, only for countries.
And that's worldwide, and it's growing. This is an early stage company. But could you talk about the RPT, right above
Touch. Okay, so RBT, we call it the rabbit mouse. It's perhaps the first product that ever brought attention to people with problems with trigger finger, carpal tunnel, and a lot of other repetitive strain injury issues. The raised buttons that you may have noticed is for the tip of it is stabilized so that you don't really click with your fingertips. You just rest there. So as you click with the bottom part of your fingers. So when you click, your hand is literally just doing this, very light. You're clicking from the base areas down here. So the benefit to that is because the fingertips are no longer being used as pressing points, so that your fingers are no longer locked together. And what it does to you is you no longer feel pain in the backs of your hand. And when you click from the bottom of your fingers is when you're clicking this way, because it's from the center of the device, you probably notice that it's not really moving at all. So it's a vertical click. Please don't hold it, and just do not hold it. Do not hold it. So then you can see each time you click it, it will literally stay in one spot. What it does is, for designers like yourself, Mark, and also people that are doing video editing or Photoshop, that pixel needs to be extremely accurate. So when you click with a regular mouse, what usually ends up happening is because the design, the shape of the mouse, it sometimes gives you a little drag in the back end. So you have to hold it really tight just to prevent it. And then because it loses ground each time after you click it, because it's due to the lateral force of pulling, you have to re-aim again. So that's unnecessary part. That's unnecessary part of the energy and time being lost. So what people end up doing is, people doing video editing usually takes about an hour and a half of work. With the RBT mouse, surprisingly, it only takes about 45 minutes. So people are slowly realizing this very easy, very simple redesign of the product. Another thing is that because you are now clicking vertically, there's no need to grip it really tight. So that comes with this parse muscle here in your hand, and that gives you a lot of carpal tunnel release from this area too as well. So my theory is that your body can heal itself if you give it the right opportunity. But what happens today is people go to doctors, and because doctors look at traditional methods of treatment and whatnot, they tell people to go get carpal tunnel release surgery, and you get a cut in here that oftentimes takes 3 to 6 months of healing time. But not everybody will heal. Sometimes there are more issues arising from that as well. And the reason why I designed it is because I was a gamer. I was really trying hard during college times, trying to become professional, and that 7 to 10 hours a day playing time, just on League of Legends alone, really just dug me in. Terrible. And I wasn't a big fan of surgery, so I do whatever I can to avoid it. I quit gaming for 5 years, didn't play at all, and during that time, I just thought about possibly coming with a solution. And this came as an accident and a mistake. So the reason for that is because originally my thought was, I'm going to create some levers here, we're called the rabbit ears. They're going to be a lot taller, so I can put my fingers inserted in between them, and then both down click and up click, so they can even out the forces. I mean, logically it makes sense, but nobody wants to use that because it's so clunky. And one time I printed from a 3D model, and I accidentally readjusted the height wrong. And obviously it's a failure. It cost me $60. So I was like, what am I going to do with this? I looked on my table, and I was, I think I was drinking at the night. And I put my hand on it, like by accident. I was just like, this feels pretty good. What if I just do that? Because the 3D model printed has that lever at the front, and also it can move around a little bit at the bottom, at the base part area. So I did that, and I was like, this actually feels pretty good. So I went to further design this concept and see how it's going to go from there.
Okay. So this product that you're now selling came about from a problem that you had, an issue with gaming and the strain it puts on the gamer's hand. And you tried to solve this problem. And while solving it, you actually, by mistake, kind of came up with the solution.
Yeah, that's what happened. I like to say I'm a genius. I came up with the first hand, but no, not really.
And for everyone at home that wants to learn more information about Garrick, Mark, and all our other guests, please visit our website, siliconvalleysuccesses.com. Follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook, where every week we provide more and more information for you at home to learn, benefit, and grow and access your dream in this amazing entrepreneur community. So Mark, let's talk about designing for the market or for manufacturing. Do most people have that in the back of their mind when they're coming up with an idea, if this can be produced or not? And what should people be thinking?
That's a really good question. I think most people arrive at an idea or a problem earlier in the process. And we can see from platforms like Kickstarter, certainly the early days of Kickstarter, people would put their ideas up there and they wouldn't have manufacturing figured out. And I actually think that we need to start thinking about that differently and really think about sourcing and manufacturing and really having a solid vendor base first. Because a lot of designers are accustomed to working with parameters. One of those parameters needs to be manufacturability. Not just manufacturability, but packaging and distribution. How we have to worry about how small devices make it from one side of the planet to the other. And if you're working with a designer or a design team or a consultancy, I think you need to start thinking about those things sooner rather than later, especially with startups and hardware in particular. This is a very kind of hardware-centric challenge.
Carrot, looking at your design, how did you go about finding a manufacturer for it? And also, your box here, it's pretty incredible. I mean, it's very aesthetic. It's very nice. How'd you go about designing the box, the manufacturer, finding them, all those pieces?
So, when people say, like, you change your mind, well, for grown-ups, we don't normally change our mind, or the way we think, but unless there's a trauma in your life or something like that, right? So, I'll talk about the manufacturing process, how I got that first. I had this idea that I wanted to, I imagined possibly meeting someone from a big trade show. At the time I was working at, the only trade show I knew was CES, which is literally just, consumer electronics show. And I went there pitching 3 years straight. First 2 years, absolutely nothing, right? The third year I went there with a cupboard, like in a presentation board, like the one you see from high school. It's like $15 one, and I brought it with me, and I talked to people about it, and people were like, there's some mouse manufacturers there. They were kind of interested, but nobody really took me seriously. So fourth year I went, and then I finally have a 3D print. I took 2 with me, just in case, somebody might take an interest. And I ran into someone, they're called Togran. It's a manufacturer, and the guy says, this is interesting, but if you're serious, come visit us in China, and then we'll see how it works, right? But this, of course, CES happens in January, so this is before Chinese New Year, and I was like, sure, I'll do that. So me hopping on the plane and get on right before Chinese New Year, the plane was packed. It was packed. I was sitting there in the middle of my seat, just, oh God, what am I doing here? But the guy brought his whole engineering team in front of me. He's like, okay, you convince these guys, you have a deal. I did. So a month later, we have a prototype. Things move pretty fast over there in Shenzhen area. So, sorry, this is Dongguan. This is where the place is, Dongguan. And once I had the first prototype, I was loving it and hating it at the same time. It was really clunky and it felt uncomfortable, but above all, it didn't quite resemble what I saw in my head. Like in my mind, I saw something that's a lot more graceful. Not quite like this yet, but at the time I thought it was pretty impressive. So we went back and redesigned it 12 more times.
12 more times.
12 more times. Each time it costed about $2,000. So imagine that, right? Eventually we had something, and the box, right? We'll talk about that later. So the box, why does it look so good? Well, I have to be honest here. I kind of copy from Apple. If you own an Apple like an iPhone, you probably noticed that that's they put the phone on the top, and I thought it was a cool idea, right? So I was like, well, I don't want to do too. I wanted to have that classic look, and you look at this design, whether you know it or you don't, sort of thing. So you want to build like a culture around it, but in terms of almost cult-like loyalty. So I don't put too much information on it, other than just a few words here. You can see your new ergonomic mouse unit is brought to you by QuadraClicks, and here it says patent pending, RBT Rebel Real 1.112, RBT Red Above Touch. But really, there's not much going on here. It's very simple. By looking in the box, you cannot tell what's inside of it. You just know there's something. And I chose the most expensive material on the packaging. It costs about $2. Okay. Does that answer your question now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, Mark, was his experience similar to the people you've met with when they've wanted to design and build a product, going to China, talking to the engineers, and actually going prototype by prototype by prototype?
Yeah, my experience overseas is a little bit different. I did not work in the same materials, but the process sounds similar. And so we would design things, we really kind of design things to sell well in the American market, but we also design things to make sure that they could be manufactured where it made most sense. And so, we would look at a variety of different countries, and then we would look at our designs and really try to understand, well, Indonesia has this type of sensibility, China can handle our volume, and so we would weigh out all of these different factors. And so we were kind of designing in both directions, how it could potentially sell in the States, and how well we can have it manufactured overseas, or in some cases domestically. But it was similar, and you would go through a series of steps. Normally 12 steps is too costly. And so I think that with experience we were able to kind of work way more efficiently in the front end when it came to developing products, and that's why, as I mentioned earlier, that vendor base is so important.
Tell us a little bit about how someone new, a startup, can reach out and create relations with these vendors.
That's a really good question.
Or any shortcuts that
there are no shortcuts, because there's a lot of manufacturers out there, there's a lot of vendors out there, there's a lot of suppliers out there, but the relationship is critical, and so developing those relationships is really, really important. And so there's a lot of designers out there that would kind of keep their vendor base tight to their chest, but at this point, everyone is accessible no matter where they are in the world, but those relationships are key. I think going to trade shows is really, really important, not just trade shows here in the States, but trade shows in Asia and Europe, going to, events where they feature new product debuts. It's not always trade shows, but a lot of industries kind of have some sort of circuit that they do, where whatever the theme or the topic or the whatever the trade might be, you can see where they hit different parts of the world throughout, or certainly different parts of the country throughout the year, and networking and going there is key. Some design consultancies provide engineering and manufacturing services, not many that I'm aware of. And then if you can poach, if you're in a startup, I think that the best designer that you might want to have on staff is probably like a mid-level designer from a corporate setting, just because they have that vertical integration that I mentioned before, whereas a lot of consultancies and a lot of independent designers might have more of a specialty. I think that corporate designers will your chances of getting a generalist, which I'm assuming would be better for a startup, someone who knows a little about a lot, could be helpful when you're trying to launch something, specifically a physical product from scratch.
So we've talked about quite a bit. We've talked about having that manufacturer in the back of your mind when you're coming up with your design from the very beginning. We've talked about designing a product and also thinking about other aspects such as who's going to manufacture it, where in the world, what specialties this person might have versus this other area. We've talked about finding a product, solving it, doing a prototype, and having to do possibly many iterations. We've also talked about the importance of relationships and vendors and how a startup first designer they might want to have on their team is a generalist to get those ideas, especially from the corporate setting. Carrick, Mark, does either of you have a story of a vendor you've worked with or a customer you've worked with that really kind of shines light on the power a designer can bring to a product?
I don't know if I have a single example. I think that the success that I've had as a designer really has to do with all of those other relationships and partnerships, right? So actually being able to deliver, especially when it comes to manufacturing, because to present concepts to a client is such a small part of what's required to actually launch something and sell something and market something and distribute something. So, I think I may have lost the original question there, but I think that all of these relationships that I have with suppliers, vendors, manufacturers have all kind of played some part in my success as a designer.
And Carrick, in a few brief summary, who's your best client and what's the best way for someone to reach out to you?
Who's my best client?
And how can someone reach out to you?
Okay, I tend to be very forgetful. I think the first time you asked me a question, I only answered the first part, so I forgot the second one. So the ideal customer for me would be someone who works in tech, someone who does design or IT works or programming.
And how can they reach you?
You can find me on Twitter. It's just twitter.com/quadraclicks.
Great. And Mark, how can someone find out more about you?
LinkedIn is probably the best place. Mark Christian Bolick, that's Mark with a K, Christian ChristianStian, last name is Bolick, Bolick.
Mark, Carrick, thank you guys for this week's episode of Silicon Valley Successes. And for everyone at home, please stay tuned, as next week we're going to have Patrick Murray, the founder of NoSun, as our guest. His company is revolutionizing parking. You'll find out about it next week on Silicon Valley Successes. Thank you.
Thank you from all of us at Silicon Valley Successes. We hope you found the information presented today useful in your path to success. For further information on accessing the resources in Silicon Valley, you may visit us on the web at siliconvalleysuccesses.com, on Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you. And remember, we want to help you in your journey to become the next success.